I still remember the first day she walked into our office. Her smile polished and perfect, like it was carefully rehearsed for maximum effect. She introduced herself as Karen, and at first glance, everyone seemed instantly charmed. She was articulate, confident, and friendly in that effortless way that makes people trust you immediately. But the moment our eyes met, something inside me twisted. A small warning that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a prickling unease, like catching a shadow out of the corner of your eye that shouldn't be there. Something about her presence made my stomach tighten, a subtle but undeniable tension that seemed to follow her across the room. At first, I tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was being paranoid. After all, I had seen too many movies and read too many stories about cunning villains disguised as friends. Maybe I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew that instinct rarely lies. And the very first week made me realize that my gut was right. The small incident started almost imperceptibly. A document I had spent hours preparing seemed to vanish from my desk without explanation. A meeting I had been promised was quietly rescheduled, without anyone informing me, and when I asked, I was told it must have been a mistake. Emails I sent, clear and professional, went unanswered for hours, sometimes even days, while others responded immediately to her messages. Nothing huge, nothing that would immediately alarm anyone else, but enough to make me pause and feel that something was off. It was the pattern that struck me once I began paying attention. Patterns are rarely coincidental, and this one felt deliberate. Karen seemed to weave a web of small, almost harmless actions that together began to create a sense of doubt around me, a subtle undermining that made my position feel fragile. It was clever, almost invisible if you weren't paying close attention. But I noticed, and once I did, I couldn't unsee it. The real turning point came during a team meeting. I had been presenting an idea I had spent countless hours refining, hoping it would impress, maybe even earn some recognition. As I spoke, I felt her gaze on me. It wasn't just a glance. It was sharp, calculating, a flicker of amusement that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of look that says, someone is watching your every move, analyzing, anticipating. A comment was made, small, almost innocent on the surface, but pointed enough to cast doubt on my proposal. She smiled as she spoke, tilting her head just slightly, a picture of concern and sincerity. But I knew better. It wasn't jealousy, I realized then. It was strategy. She was plotting, and I was her target. Every subtle interruption, every faintly amused glance, every carefully crafted word aimed to destabilize me, and I had walked straight into her trap without even knowing it. The realization hit me harder than I expected, a cold sinking feeling that mixed fear and anger. I had trusted this office, my colleagues, even myself, to read people correctly, and I had been blind to her intentions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, replaying the day over and over in my mind. Every interaction, every slight, every perfectly timed remark, every smile that had seemed innocent now felt loaded with meaning. I remembered the way she lingered by the coffee machine, accidentally dropping hints about my work. I remembered lunch conversations where her words, light and casual on the surface, contained subtle jabs and insinuations. Even the emails she sent, polite and professional in tone, now seemed like tools in her arsenal, designed to manipulate, to isolate, to confuse. I went over each detail repeatedly. The meetings she forgot to include me in, the misfiled documents, the minor mistakes that seemed to happen whenever she was around. It all started to make sense. She wasn't clumsy. She wasn't forgetful. She was precise, careful, methodical, and I had become her target. By morning, I had reached a conclusion I couldn't ignore. Karen wasn't just a new coworker trying to find her footing. She was something else entirely. A storm gathering strength, quiet for now, but impossible to ignore once it hit. I could feel it in the way people responded to her, in the subtle tension in the office air whenever she passed by, in the glances and small smiles that seemed innocent but weren't. I knew then that I had two choices. I could ignore it, pretend it wasn't happening, and hope that her actions wouldn't escalate. Or I could pay attention, watch, learn, and prepare. I chose the latter. I realized that to survive, to protect myself, I needed to see the game she was playing, anticipate her moves, and stay one step ahead. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about strategy. From that day, I began observing her constantly, noting every gesture, every conversation, every interaction, no matter how small. I paid attention to her tone of voice, the timing of her words, the way she interacted with colleagues, and the subtle shifts in her demeanor. I started to connect the dots, and slowly, a picture began to emerge. A web of manipulation that was far more sophisticated than I had imagined. I realized that Karen had mastered the art of subtlety. She could plant seeds of doubt, nudge situations in her favor, and manipulate people without ever being overtly aggressive. She had an uncanny ability to make herself seem innocent, even helpful, while quietly undermining me. And every time I thought I had seen her limits, she found a new way to test them. And so, I braced myself. Not with fear, but with determination. I couldn't control her actions, but I could control mine. I would not be caught off guard. I would not be outsmarted. The storm was coming, and I would meet it head-on, prepared, alert, and ready. I didn't know what her next move would be. I didn't know how far she would go. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just a test of patience or endurance. This was a battle of wits, and I was determined not to lose. The first day had been a warning, subtle but clear. And now, every step I took, every decision I made, had to be calculated, precise, and deliberate. The game had begun, and I was ready to play. It started small, subtle enough that anyone else would have brushed it off as bad luck or human error. But when you're already aware that someone has their eyes on you, every detail hits differently. I had spent nights refining that project presentation. Long hours, late evenings, running numbers again and again, because I wanted every slide to be sharp, flawless. I wanted to prove myself, to earn respect through work, not politics or flattery. So when I walked into that meeting room, I felt confident, prepared, ready. The team sat around the large wooden table, screens glowing, aroma of coffee drifting through the air. I took a deep breath, clicked to the first slide, and began explaining the forecast numbers. Everything flowed smoothly, and I could feel heads nodding, interest building. For a moment, it felt like I had the room in my hands, until she struck. It was almost elegant how she did it. Quiet, controlled, disguised behind innocence. Karen leaned slightly forward, her eyebrows lifting just enough to look curious, not hostile. "Are you sure these numbers are correct?" she asked in that syrupy, sweet tone. A single sentence, a tiny question, but the timing, perfectly calculated. The room went still for a moment. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I glanced at the table, then back at the slide. The numbers looked right, but then I saw it. One cell, one tiny figure that had been changed by a single digit. Not enough to destroy the whole presentation, but enough to raise doubt, enough to shift the room's energy. I knew I hadn't made that mistake. I triple-checked everything, but I froze, just for a moment, and that hesitation was enough. Someone chuckled lightly. A few exchanged looks, and the tension evaporated, except for me. Inside, it felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. She didn't accuse me. She didn't confront me harshly. She just planted doubt, quietly, gracefully, and she got away with it. I forced myself to continue, maintaining composure, but inside, a seed of realization rooted itself. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't a joke. She had tampered with my work, and she wanted me to react, to panic, to look incompetent, emotional, or weak, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. After the meeting, as people packed up, Karen gave me a small sympathetic smile, the kind you give someone who just stumbled in front of a crowd. It was almost comforting. If I hadn't known the truth, I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, searching her eyes for guilt, remorse, something. There was nothing, only calm confidence, as if she already knew she had won that round. That's when anger replaced confusion. It didn't explode. It settled quietly, like a storm forming on the horizon. I felt it spread through me. Not loud or chaotic, but steady and controlled. She wanted to make me look incompetent, and she was willing to work in the shadows to do it. But that was only the beginning. Whispers started shortly after. Small comments in the hallway. Questions disguised as concern. Is everything okay with your workload? Heard you've been missing details lately. You seem stressed. Everything all right? At first, I ignored it. Then the tone became sharper, the remarks bolder. Suddenly, I had a reliability problem. Someone mentioned I had been rude. Another implied I wasn't contributing enough. None of it true. None of it real. Yet somehow, the narrative spread. People who once greeted me warmly began offering short, stiff nods. Conversations that used to flow freely turned cold. A few colleagues avoided eye contact altogether, suddenly too busy or distracted to talk. It wasn't obvious hostility. It was distance. Quiet, poisonous distance. That's how sabotage works when it's done by someone skilled. It doesn't crash through the door. It slips under it, slowly, silently, until the room fills with smoke and you're the only one choking. I knew if I reacted emotionally, I'd fall right into her hands. People don't believe the one who looks desperate. They believe the one who stays calm. So I held my composure. Even as frustration clawed at my insides, I smiled when I wanted to scream. I worked harder when I felt exhausted. I stood taller when I was sinking inside. But I wasn't going to let her destroy what I had worked for. I began keeping records. Notes on conversations, dates, times, changes made to shared files, screenshots, email backups, everything. If she wanted to play a quiet game, I would play it louder in my head, quieter in the room, and smarter everywhere else. This wasn't just about proving she was sabotaging me. It became about learning her patterns, her timing, her triggers, her confidence. Every move she made told me something. Every fake smile, every innocent question, every comment disguised as concern revealed another piece of who she truly was. She thought she was playing chess, while everyone else played checkers. But the mistake people like her make is assuming no one else sees the board. I saw it. I saw everything. And in that moment, the fear I once felt transformed into resolve. I wasn't just defending my work anymore. I was studying her, preparing. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't office politics. This was a deliberate attack. She wanted me gone, shamed, frustrated, isolated, or broken. And the more I understood her methods, the clearer it became. If I didn't stay ahead of her, she would get exactly what she wanted. But she underestimated one thing. I don't crumble. I don't retreat. When someone tries to corner me, I don't shrink. I sharpen. And I had just begun sharpening. I didn't want to believe it at first. No one ever wants to believe that someone they work beside, someone who smiles, chats casually about weekend plans, compliments your work, could be plotting against them. But denial doesn't stop damage. It only delays the realization. And by the time it hits, you're already bleeding. Weeks passed. and what started as tiny inconveniences snowballed into a pattern even the blind could have seen. Emails that I distinctly remembered sending somehow never reached clients. Files I had saved and double-checked suddenly contained errors. Errors I would never make. Meetings I prepared for replaced with sudden updates. I apparently failed to communicate. Every mistake pointed at me. Every doubt whispered behind my back. Every raised brow, every hushed conversation that fell silent when I walked into the room. They were pieces of a truth I didn't want to accept. Karen was dismantling my reputation brick by brick. I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon, staring at my inbox like it might explode. A client had sent a confused follow-up, asking why I'd given them outdated numbers. My stomach dropped. I had sent the latest version. I knew that. I had confirmed it twice. My fingers trembled as I opened the shared drive, and there it was. My document, edited. The file date showed activity at a time I wasn't even online. It felt like a punch, not just because of the sabotage, but because someone had intentionally stepped into my work, meddled with my effort, and watched quietly as I took the fall. That someone was her. And suddenly, her sweet tone, her fake concern, her perfectly timed questions in meetings. All of it clicked into place like a cruel puzzle. She wasn't clumsy or curious. She wasn't trying to help. She was strategic, surgical, patient. If betrayal is an art, she was a master. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization settle like ice in my veins. This wasn't insecurity talking. It wasn't paranoia. It was happening. And here's the bitter truth most people don't like facing. Sometimes the person smiling at you is the one sharpening the knife. I felt foolish, angry at myself, honestly. I had believed her little friendly remarks. I had shared ideas with her, sometimes even asked for input, thinking we were building something together. That trust, it became the rope she used to tug the floor out from under me. Nothing stings like trusting the wrong person. Nothing feels as humiliating as realizing you handed someone the tools to attack you. But rage without direction is useless. You don't win wars by shouting. Real power sits quietly and waits. So instead of confronting her that day, instead of storming into her space and demanding explanations, I took a breath and forced myself to think. She wanted me reactive. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to look unstable, emotional, defensive. Giving her that would be playing her game, and losing was not an option. I started documenting everything, every edit history, every suspicious timestamp, every forwarded email trail, screenshots, backups, a quiet archive of truth. When someone plays dirty, evidence becomes armor, and as I gathered proof, I watched her more closely. Her timing, her behavior, the way she interacted with others. There was a pattern. She didn't just undermine people. She isolated them first. Break trust, seed doubt, then strike. Classic manipulation tactics. She thrived on chaos she created, but pretended to be above. I noticed how she would casually bump into the boss, always when something went wrong. The concerned tone, the sympathetic sigh, the "I hope everything is okay with their workload." It was sickeningly smooth. And to think I once admired her professionalism. That admiration felt like a bruise now. But here's what she didn't expect. I learned fast. Once you betray me, I don't forget, and I don't stay unprepared. So I stopped sharing anything verbally. I stopped leaving shared documents editable. I watched my tone, my reactions, my work channels. Silence became my strategy. Awareness became my shield, and with every quiet step I took back, her confidence grew. Because she thought she was winning. Let her think that. Let her feel untouchable. People like her become sloppy when they believe the game is already theirs. That day, sitting in the office late, staring at that corrupted file, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was resolve. She wasn't simply attacking my work. She was testing my strength. And I wasn't going to crumble. Not for someone who built her success on sabotage and fake smiles. The world isn't fair. People don't always get what they deserve. But if someone thinks they can break you quietly, you don't cry about it. You sharpen your patience, gather your proof, and wait for the right moment to strike back with precision, not emotion. Revenge isn't loud. It's calculated. And survival sometimes means letting your enemy believe they're winning. Right up until the ground disappears beneath their feet, she thought I was naive. She thought I was soft. But storms create stronger steel. And I was done pretending I didn't see her for what she was. And deep down, she had no idea. I was already preparing for a reckoning. I stayed at my desk long after the lights dimmed and the office settled into silence. For once, the quiet felt like an ally. No false smiles. No stage concern. No eyes waiting for me to slip. Just me, my thoughts, and the truth I could no longer pretend wasn't happening. If she wanted to play a long game war, fine. But I wasn't going to stay the helpless target anymore. I wasn't going to keep absorbing hits and hoping someone would notice. Hope is for people who don't yet understand how ruthless the world can be. I understood it now, painfully, clearly. And understanding changes everything. I opened my notebook, the same one I use for brainstorming and growth plans. Funny how something meant for inspiration had now become a battlefield blueprint. I began writing dates, incidents, emails, subtle remarks, strange timing, edited files, witness behaviors, expressions during meetings, even tone shifts. When you put it all down, the pattern stops being paranoia and starts being reality, a brutal, calculated reality. Her method was almost elegant in its cruelty. Plant doubt, let it spread, then swoop in as the hero while I drowned quietly. She wasn't destroying me by force. She was eroding me drop by drop, making me look like I was falling apart on my own. And honestly, that was smart. Twisted, evil, but smart. Most people react emotionally when they're betrayed. They confront, they accuse, they demand an explanation, and in that reaction, they lose. They look unstable, insecure, dramatic. She wanted that from me. She expected it. I could practically hear her rehearsing her innocent lines. I was just trying to help. I don't know why they're attacking me like this. Fake sympathy soaked in venom. She'd practiced the role too many times to slip now. But here's the thing. Staying silent isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes the smartest move is to watch, learn, prepare, and strike when the damage will be permanent, not temporary. That night, I finally shifted from defense to offense. Revenge wasn't an emotional impulse anymore. It became a structured plan, ruthless, methodical, and absolutely justified. 3 pillars: simple, direct, tactical. First, evidence. Not scraps, not casual screenshots. A full, undeniable archive. Document trails, email logs, version histories, timestamps, backup copies, meeting notes, even witness behavior shifts. I wouldn't just prove sabotage. I would expose the pattern, the intention, the manipulation. People like her rely on chaos and confusion. Evidence strips away both. Proof isn't loud, it's lethal. Second, rebuild allies. Not by begging or explaining or trying to clear my name. That would play into her hands. Instead, I would prove myself through consistency. Quiet competence, subtle excellence. Let them see my work stand on its own again. Let them question why their opinion changed in the first place. Doubt is contagious, but so is clarity. And once people notice cracks in a liar's narrative, the entire illusion collapses fast. If she wanted to isolate me, fine. But isolation works both ways. Eventually people look at the quiet one minding their business. delivering results, staying steady, and they start asking questions. Why did we ever doubt them? That's how you shift power. Not by shouting, but by making others realize they were manipulated. The truth tastes better when people discover it themselves. Third, exposure. Not a messy confrontation. Not some dramatic hallway argument. No, this would be precision. A moment when she felt untouchable. When she believed the game was over and victory was hers. That's when I would present everything. Not in anger, but in calm, undeniable detail. When someone builds their power on lies, reality becomes their greatest enemy. And I would make sure reality hit her like a tidal wave she never saw coming. I leaned back, reading over the plan. It wasn't about pettiness or ego anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace, and my name. It was about proving that kindness isn't weakness, and silence doesn't mean surrender. She underestimated me, and nothing fuels a comeback more than being underestimated. And the part that made me almost laugh, she genuinely believed she was dealing with someone too soft, too trusting, too naive to fight back. But soft doesn't equal stupid. Trusting doesn't equal blind. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one taking notes, not losses. Sometimes the nicest person is the one you should be most afraid of when you push them too far. I closed the notebook, calm settling into me like steel, cooling into form. I no longer felt anxious or uncertain. The fear, the confusion, the second guessing, it evaporated. Clarity replaced it. Power replaced it. She had dragged me into a war without realizing I could fight, and now she had no idea a storm was forming. One she created herself. I shut off my desk lamp and walked out of the office. It wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone sharpening a blade while the enemy slept peacefully, believing they'd already won. Let her smile tomorrow. Let her feel safe. Let her think she's victorious. The funniest thing about manipulators? They never see it coming when the person they picked as a victim decides to stop bleeding and start hunting. Over the next month, I moved through the office with quiet purpose. If anyone saw me, they'd think nothing had changed. Same routine, same face, same calm presence. But inside, every breath carried intention. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was building, layer by layer, step by step. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt in control. Documentation became my armor. Every suspicious change, every unusual file timestamp, every email accidentally forwarded or mysteriously altered, I saved it all. Not like someone hoarding messages out of insecurity, but like someone preparing a case. Screenshots weren't enough. I recorded version history, backup logs, system metadata. If she altered a file at 2:14 p.m., I had the matching credentials log, showing she accessed it right before. If she forwarded something to a client pretending it came from me, I kept the original draft and the audit trail. And the more evidence I gathered, the clearer her pattern became. Predictable, sloppy in her confidence, believing that smiles and concerned eyebrows could hide everything. Then came the allies phase. I didn't make speeches or pull anyone aside to complain. That's what desperate people do. Instead, I worked. Clean executions, quiet efficiency. I started taking initiative again. Not loudly, not showy, just steadily. I triple-checked reports before submitting, offered solutions before problems appeared, and followed up with clients myself. Slowly people noticed. A few co-workers who had been distant started asking me for help again. A manager nodded approvingly in a meeting. Small things, but small things shift energy. Doubt about me started to fade, and in its place came questions about her. I didn't need to expose her lies. Her own behavior did that. When she whispered concerns about me, I responded with results. When she looked for cracks, she found none. She expected me to crumble. Instead, I held steady, and cracks formed on her side. And I saw it, that subtle flicker in her expression when she realized the narrative wasn't sticking anymore. Manipulators hate losing control. They panic quietly. They overreach. And I was counting on it. Patience became my greatest weapon. Revenge isn't loud. It's patient and precise. I watched her carefully. Her routine. Her methods. The way she always hovered when I received praise. The way her fake compliments came sharper than insults. She kept trying to create mistakes in my work, but I was ahead of her now. Every trap she set, I dismantled before anyone noticed. I didn't need the satisfaction of calling her out early. I wanted the moment she buried herself, without knowing I handed her the shovel. And then it happened. The moment I knew I'd been waiting for. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Actually, it was almost laughably small. She forwarded an internal strategy email to a client, attaching the wrong file, a confidential draft that wasn't ready. Anyone else would have called it a simple oversight, but she didn't stop there. She tried to pin it on me. She CC'd senior management, later claiming I had mixed the files. Polite wording, sweet tone, fake concern, a little performance she'd done 100 times before. But this time she slipped. Arrogance makes people lazy. She forgot digital trails don't lie. The edit history proved she opened the document minutes before the email was sent. The server logs matched her system access, not mine. I had the original draft timestamp, and the version that appeared after her edits, complete with her user ID in the metadata. It wasn't just sabotage. It was undeniable proof of intent. I remember staring at the email chain, not angry, not shocked, just calm. This wasn't a setback. It was the moment everything aligned. She had just created the perfect opportunity for her downfall. She thought she'd cornered me again, but in reality, she walked into a trap, built by her own confidence and my quiet patience. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was defending myself. I felt like someone who had been quietly sharpening their blade while the enemy celebrated too early. A strange sense of peace washed over me. Not vengeance, not rage, just clarity. She thought she'd delivered a blow, but she didn't realize she'd triggered the final phase of my plan. All the lies, all the whispers, all the manipulation. Now they had a spotlight waiting. And this time, she wouldn't be able to hide behind fake concern or polished smiles. The game had shifted, and she didn't even know the board had changed. The moment she'd feared, without realizing, the moment she'd made me the villain in her story, one too many times, had finally arrived, and I was ready. I didn't march into the office like someone seeking revenge. There were no slamming doors, no raised voices, no dramatic gestures to signal the storm about to hit. That's the thing about true confrontation. It's not about chaos. It's about control. And today, I wanted control. Every step I took toward the conference room was measured, deliberate, calm. On the surface, I appeared just like any other employee, discussing a routine concern with a colleague. But beneath that calm, I carried weeks of preparation, a mountain of evidence, and a mind sharpened for this exact moment. Karen arrived a few minutes later. As expected, her signature smile pasted in place, polished and practiced. But there was a flicker in her eyes I hadn't seen before, a tension beneath her carefully maintained exterior. I could feel it. She sensed that something was different this time, though she had no idea how thoroughly the game had changed. That smile, once disarming, now looked brittle, like porcelain with cracks hidden just beneath the surface. She thought she was about to play her usual part, sweet, concerned, helpful. But she didn't know that for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating. Our manager entered shortly after, unaware that the quiet tension filling the room was more than just professional decorum. I started without theatrics, without preamble. There was no need. I simply presented the facts. Calmly, confidently, methodically. I walked through the timeline of events, one by one, showing how each minor incident, the misplaced files, the altered reports, the misdirected emails, wasn't isolated. It was all part of a deliberate, calculated pattern. The longer she had been around, the clearer it became. Every small disruption, every whispered suggestion meant to cast doubt was intentional. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't allow emotion to color my voice. I merely explained, piece by piece, how each act pointed back to her. I showed the emails she had manipulated, the files she had tampered with, the versions that had been altered on purpose, the timing that could not be coincidental. Every screenshot, every version history, every record was meticulously organized, labeled, and undeniable. I wanted clarity, not chaos. I wanted truth, not theatrics. Karen tried to intervene almost immediately, as if rehearsing a line she had delivered countless times before. I think there's a misunderstanding, she stammered, her voice catching in a way that betrayed the first cracks in her armor. Her smile faltered, no longer the confident mask she wore so well. The tension in her posture, the quick glances toward our manager, the slight hesitation before speaking, it all screamed panic. I ignored her. There was no point. The evidence spoke louder than any feigned innocence could. As our manager sifted through the documents, the room grew still. It wasn't dramatic, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that only truth can create. Every altered file, every timestamp, every manipulated message formed a pattern that was undeniable. It wasn't me against her anymore. It was facts against deceit, and facts, unlike excuses, are unarguable. Karen's attempts to interject grew more frantic. Maybe it was the system. Maybe the email sent the wrong attachment by mistake. She tried again, but the cracks in her composure were widening. The calm, calculated tone she had perfected over weeks of manipulation could no longer withstand scrutiny. She tried to recover, tried to charm her way out, but the foundation of her lies was already crumbling. Every attempt to redirect attention, to sow confusion, fell flat against the meticulous evidence laid before the manager. I didn't need to emphasize a single word. I didn't need to raise my voice or show anger. My calm confidence carried more power than any outburst could. I let the records do the talking, and they told a story she could no longer hide. The timeline was clear. The manipulation was clear. The intention behind every accident was undeniable. Every small act that had been designed to isolate me, to make me look incompetent, to create doubt in the minds of colleagues. All laid bare, our manager's expression shifted gradually. From surprise to realization, then to concern. I could see the gears turning, the sudden understanding of just how systematic her sabotage had been. This wasn't incompetence or office politics anymore. This was deliberate harm, and the evidence left no room for doubt. I could feel the momentum of the room change. The once subtle tension that she had used to manipulate colleagues began to dissolve, replaced by clarity and attention to the truth. Karen's smile was gone. Her usual composure had disintegrated into something brittle, forced, a veneer that could no longer hide the panic creeping through her. She looked for any foothold, searching desperately for sympathy or defense, but there was none. Every argument she tried to make faltered under the weight of reality. Every maybe and perhaps fell flat. The evidence didn't allow for ambiguity, and I presented it systematically, calmly, without a single trace of theatrics. I watched as her confidence eroded, line by line, fact by fact. She realized finally that her web of deceit had been dismantled in a way she couldn't talk her way out of. There were no witnesses needed to validate it. There were no opinion polls to sway. Just documented truth, methodical and undeniable. That left her exposed. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about triumphing over her emotionally. It was about reclaiming my professional life, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I had been methodical, patient, and strategic, and now those qualities had brought justice in its purest form. I felt no rush of revenge, only the quiet satisfaction of righting a wrong that had been quietly eroding my career. Finally, our manager looked up, his face steady, resolute. He understood the full scope of what had been happening. Karen, once untouchable, once confident, was now facing the consequences of a web she had spun herself. And as I sat there, calm and composed, the tension in the room shifted completely. It was no longer about conflict or fear. It was about balance, fairness, and truth asserting itself. The room that had once felt hostile now felt just. The same walls that had witnessed quiet sabotage now echoed with the silent power of accountability. And Karen, for the first time, experienced the weight of her own actions. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't apologizing convincingly. She was just still. And in that stillness, I realized something profound. Justice doesn't always have to be loud. It doesn't need dramatics or anger. Sometimes it is quiet, unwavering, methodical, and inevitable. And sometimes, when it arrives, it doesn't just restore balance. It exposes everything for exactly what it is. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a calm I hadn't known in weeks. My reputation intact, my work validated, my patience rewarded. Karen was no longer the storm in the office. She was just someone who had underestimated the quiet, determined person sitting across from her. She had relied on deception, manipulation, and fear, and all of it had collapsed in the face of preparation, evidence, and resolve. For the first time in a long while, the office felt steady. The air that had been thick with tension was cleared. The web of lies she had spun so carefully had unraveled, and the lesson was clear. Those who try to harm others quietly often fail when faced with patience, strategy, and undeniable truth. The confrontation didn't need to be loud to be absolute. It didn't need anger to be powerful. It didn't need chaos to deliver justice. All it needed was me, prepared, steady, and armed with the one thing no manipulation could withstand: proof. And in that quiet, decisive moment, I finally felt free. The office felt different the next morning, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet, undeniable shift that made the air feel lighter. Karen was no longer the looming presence that had shadowed every meeting, every project, every conversation. She had been reassigned, her influence stripped away, her carefully cultivated authority quietly dismantled. By the very evidence she had ignored in her arrogance, people walked with a steadier step. Conversations flowed without the constant undercurrent of tension, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the weight of anticipation pressing down on my chest. Colleagues approached me cautiously at first. Apologies came, small at first, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize," they said, voices soft but genuine. Others admitted more openly that they had been manipulated, that they hadn't seen the full scope of her actions, that they had unknowingly played a part in letting doubt spread. It was surreal to hear, not out of gloating, but out of recognition. All this time, I had been battling not just her sabotage, but the invisible currents of misplaced trust, subtle whispers, and half-believed rumors. And now, the truth was out, clear and undeniable, and it had restored not only my reputation, but also my sense of peace. I realized something vital in those quiet hours. After the confrontation, trust is invaluable, yes, but so is vigilance. It's easy to believe that a friendly smile, a polished tone, a smooth explanation is all it seems to be. But appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes those closest to you are capable of the sharpest betrayals. Not everyone who seems to offer support has your best interests at heart. Some people play a long game, motivated by self-interest, envy, or the need to assert dominance, and they'll manipulate and undermine to achieve it. Recognizing that reality doesn't make you cynical, it makes you prepared. Yet the lesson wasn't just about vigilance or awareness. The most striking revelation was about power, the kind that comes not from anger, not from fury, but from strategy, patience, and measured action. The best revenge, I realized, doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention or provoke chaos. It waits, it studies, it prepares. And when the moment is right, it lets the truth speak for itself. My weeks of careful observation, methodical documentation, and quiet rebuilding had not just exposed her misdeeds, but had done so with a precision and calm that no outburst could ever match. I thought about the first days of this ordeal. The suspicious smile that had seemed harmless, the tiny incidents that piled up silently, the manipulations that had initially felt like minor annoyances. I remembered the frustration, the sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, but those experiences had been more than just obstacles. They had been lessons. They had taught me the value of patience, the necessity of careful planning, and the quiet strength that comes from remaining composed when others hope to see you falter. In the end, I realized that the storm I had weathered had transformed me. Not just professionally, but personally. Colleagues gradually returned to a natural rhythm, offering collaboration instead of suspicion. Projects ran smoothly. Meetings became spaces of productive conversation rather than subtle power plays. And as I observed the subtle shifts in the office dynamic, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not a rush of triumph or gloating victory, but a deeper, more enduring sense of balance restored. The environment that had once felt hostile now felt fair, and in that fairness, I found closure. Karen's absence from my daily challenges became a strange sort of relief. There were no more tests of patience, disguised as friendly gestures. No more attempts to manipulate perception. No more uncertainty about who could be trusted. The void she left was quiet, but it was significant. And in that quiet, I saw the most important truth. Those who build power on deceit are fragile, because their strength is only as real as the lies that support it. Remove the lies, remove the power, and as I reflected on everything, I realized that I had grown beyond anger. I had learned the difference between being reactive and being strategic, between venting fury and directing action. True strength, I discovered, doesn't come from confrontation alone. It comes from preparation, from patience, and from understanding that justice doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, steadily, and irrevocably, changing the landscape without anyone needing to witness theatrics. By the end of the day, I felt a clarity I hadn't known for weeks. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and deceit, and I had come through not just unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more confident. The lesson was clear: trust cautiously, act deliberately, and let the truth, when the time is right, speak for itself. There is a power in waiting, in watching, and in letting reality do what anger and confrontation cannot. And in that realization, I felt an unexpected serenity, the kind that comes when a long, tense chapter finally closes, and you know without doubt that you emerged not just intact, but victorious. Looking back, I realized that everything I went through wasn't just a challenge. It was a masterclass in patience, strategy, and self-awareness. At the time, it felt exhausting, infuriating, and even isolating. I replayed moments in my head, over and over, wondering how someone could be so calculated, so manipulative, and so cruel under the guise of charm and professionalism. But now, with some distance, I see that each trial, each minor sabotage, and each quiet attempt to undermine me was a lesson disguised as hardship. If I had reacted impulsively, shouted, confronted her without evidence, or allowed anger to cloud my judgment, I would have played right into her hands. I would have become part of the story she wanted to tell, a pawn in her carefully orchestrated game. Instead, I stayed calm, methodical, and focused on facts. I observed, documented, and planned, and in doing so, I transformed betrayal into a teacher. I turned her attempts to break me into a roadmap for resilience, for understanding not just people like her, but also myself, my own strength, my capacity for patience, and my ability to remain composed under pressure. The workplace is often a battlefield in disguise. People can be charming, persuasive, and manipulative, and the most dangerous ones are the quiet operators who hide malice behind smiles. But no one is truly invincible. Deceit always leaves traces. Lies can only cover reality for so long. Evidence, consistency, and truth have a way of surfacing. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but inevitably. What I learned is that preparation, vigilance, and integrity aren't just abstract virtues. They are practical tools that safeguard your career, your reputation, and your peace of mind. Now, when I encounter someone like Karen, someone who once seemed untouchable, someone whose charm masks strategy, I no longer feel fear or resentment. I smile politely, maintain professionalism, and observe quietly. I don't need to prove myself or react emotionally. I know the real power isn't in confrontation or aggression. It's in strategy, composure, and the ability to rise above deceit without compromising your own integrity. The most potent victories are the ones you don't announce. They're earned quietly, decisively, and with precision. I carry this lesson into every interaction, every decision, and every challenge I face. I've learned that resilience isn't about brute strength or fury. It's about staying steady when others hope you'll falter, about seeing patterns others miss, and about turning even the most painful betrayals into a source of empowerment. What could have been a story of defeat became a story of mastery, of mental fortitude, and of strategic triumph. And above all, I've learned that personal and professional growth often comes from the moments we least expect. From navigating deceit, handling manipulation, and emerging with clarity, betrayal isn't just a test of character. It's a lesson in foresight, patience, and the subtle but undeniable power of truth. I carry that lesson every day, in every decision, and in every relationship. I don't let fear dictate my actions, nor do I underestimate the quiet threats around me. Instead, I remain vigilant, measured, and confident in my ability to rise above, because real strength isn't loud. Real power is patience, strategy, and the ability to turn adversity into wisdom. And so, when I think of that chapter, of Karen, of the battles fought quietly behind office doors, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the challenge, for the lessons, and for the opportunity to understand what it truly means to be resilient, strategic, and unshakable. That, more than any victory over her, is the gift I carry forward. A reminder that integrity and intelligence always have the final word.